troisième point quand même sur le document consacré au changement climatique, hein, qui est donc sorti fin 2008, validé début 2009. Bon, quand on regarde ce qui se passe dans les transports, on a quand même sur, je ne sais plus si c'est des millions de tonnes de carbone ou de CO2, mais peu importe, on en a quand même pratiquement 50 sur 57 qui viennent de la technologie, soit par amélioration des standards des véhicules, soit par des fuels moins carbonés, donc incluant de l'éthanol. Là encore, on est sur quelque chose au fond d'historique. Hein, l'éthanol a été proposé pour des questions de pollution. Donc, on voit bien quand même que le gros des espoirs se porte d'une certaine façon sur la technologie, et on a 5, c'est un peu l'hommage aux collectivités territoriales, sur 57 millions de tonnes à économiser. Il y en a 5 qui sont pour les changements d'usage local de l'espace, et 1 pour le fameux train à grande vitesse qui desservira peut-être un jour la Californie. Bon, donc voilà un petit peu quelques questions. Comment on fait cohabiter deux plans aussi, enfin d'esprit quand même aussi différents? Est-ce que vous, comme nous, êtes dépendants fortement de votre histoire? Est-ce que finalement l'effet de serre n'est pas une façon de parler de la même chose avec d'autres mots? Et enfin, oui, peut-être dernier point, j'ai bien vu qu'il y avait une préférence qui m'a surprise aux États-Unis pour des standards en matière de consommation automobile, c'est-à-dire pas plus de, enfin une démarche très très administrative que j'avais un peu soviétique. Et c'est pour les standards, si l'État fédéral ne vous y autorise pas, alors vous recourrez aux FIBET, sur lesquels apparemment FIBET, donc c'est un peu le bonus-malus, hein, les FIBET. Et j'ai été étonné que vous n'ayez pas pris les FIBET en premier. Et je voudrais savoir pourquoi, alors que vous nous avez présenté beaucoup d'instruments de marché, là on est sur de la régulation un peu pure et dure.
Well, maybe I could answer these in reverse order. Why do people prefer standards rather than market instruments? I think it's because they think that the fuel efficiency standards will be paid for by the automobile companies who don't vote. And that it seems like a costless commitment on the part of a voter, say, well, yes, I'll vote for cleaner cars. I won't buy one voluntarily, but I'll vote to force the manufacturers to offer them to us. I think it's because of our preference to conceal the cost of change from the drivers, and in doing that, maybe it's the only way we succeed politically, that there seems to be so little willingness to make personal sacrifices that we adopt policies that appear to be paid for by somebody else. So I think that's why we prefer standards rather than prices as the way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That it seems painless to us, and it doesn't affect older cars. It only affects new cars. So people can continue driving their old Hummers and Range Rovers and large cars and pay low prices for gasoline, knowing that new cars will have to be clean. So I think that we're just chipping away very slowly at what will be. Well, maybe we don't have to move very fast. I don't know. By 2020, many of these cars will be out of the fleet, I suppose. There was, as you say, there was a hope that technology will will solve some of our problems. And I think the technology of these very high-tech parking meters where you can change the prices remotely, you can charge different prices at different times of day, you can sense whether the space is being occupied. All of this new technology will allow us to manage what has been poorly managed, and as you say, is poorly managed here in Paris. As they say, you can't manage what you can't measure. You cannot manage what you cannot measure. And in Paris, they have no way of knowing exactly how many spaces are occupied and how many of them are paid for. But I think when it becomes common to manage parking the way we manage the sale of electricity or telephones. I mean, the telephones would be a perfect example. You pay higher prices for calling longer distances, or you pay higher prices for calling at peak times. France is famous for its pioneering electrical prices that vary by time of day. So I think you're very France's economists are pioneers in analyzing the effect of variable prices based on peak demand. So I think you have the intellectual background, and soon we'll have the technological background to manage something that has been mismanaged for 100 years. I think in terms of the political context of parking, I know it's difficult to charge people for something they've been getting for free, but I think in the United States, we're getting around that problem by saying, here's what we'll do with the revenue. We will clean your sidewalks. We will give you free transit passes. We will show people that they're getting something for their money at the local level. I understand the fiscal context in France is very different. You have a much more centralized fiscal system where all the money seems to go to Paris and then comes back, maybe. That I think it is more of an American system of local control and local payments for things that makes me think that we ought to return meter money to the neighborhoods that earn it. But I think it could happen, perhaps not in France, which is a very centralized fiscal system, but in a lot of countries in the world. There was an issue about Google, are they going to take over transportation? I think what they have done is quite remarkable, is take over publishing public transportation schedules, that they do a wonderful job of putting on their on the web the arrival and departure times and routes of all transit systems, at least in the United States. And I'm sure they're doing it in the rest of the world, as long as the public transportation company gives them in machine-readable form their transportation schedules. Google will put it in, the kind of magic they do with presentation. They're very good at making this available. There was a question about electric vehicles and the demand for electricity. I think our focus on fuel standards, the carbon content of fuel, is making us look at the carbon content of the electricity and whether this will really reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to a very fuel-efficient gasoline-powered car. I think that the hope is that the vehicles will be charged at off-peak when electricity prices are very low. There's a lot of excess generating capacity. And I think that, as with everything we use, batteries are a challenge, whether they're laptop computers or flashlights or anything like that. I think the great technological challenge of this century may be the battery. And then there was the more difficult question about the state's commitment to building a lot of roads and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Well, I think our fiscal problem has fixed that controversy, is that what Mark said, all that is solid melts into thin air. Well, I think all our hopes of building a lot more roads have melted into thin air because we just don't have the money to do it. I think and people are not willing to pay to do it. So I think that that is a very real conflict between a commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and a commitment to build a lot more roads. But I'm sure that's a worldwide problem. But thank you very much for your comments.